In this second part, we're continuing where we left off with building this bulldozer from the ground up. So again, as with the previous part, I'm going to pretty much remake this area. There's very little I can salvage in terms of the big shapes, so I'm just restarting and making a big box here that will encompass the large shape of the track covers, which is what we'll be doing in this video. Just trying to match this as close as possible, and you can see that top part is sticking out a bit. I'll see what I do with that. I might extrude it later, might go for something in between, moving this out there, and just getting the big general shapes to match up with the high poly. Using some extrude here. Also, I'm not going to be molding this as one single piece with the chassis that I've made before, because I think it's going to be easier to have this as a separate part, easier to unwrap. Makes it easier to mirror some things. Just sounds like a more sensible decision for me. So I'm adding this extra edge here so I can extrude this side part here where we have this metal piece that folds over with a few nuts that sit in it. And then I can select this area and move it up so we match the high poly better. This edge is slightly lower. And then I can use this area here to do another extrude so that I have enough geometry to create this part here. Just making sure to make the most out of the limited edges I have so that I can try and follow the high poly as much as possible. So right here we've got this sort of hole at the back where the rear lights for the bulldozer sit. So I'm going to do an inset so I can work with that. To an inset, and then it's time for an extrude. I'm doing an extrude at 0 and then moving it out. That's a technique I use a lot. I really don't like the default value for the extrude, so I just prefer to do it at 0, and then so I create the geometry and I have to move it manually. So once I've done that, I'm going to optimize this a bit. There's quite some geometry here that is not needed. So target welding this. I'm just trying to do it from the start. I mean, it's just quicker to do that. So, and on the inside here, we have a few polygons I don't need. And take note, I turned on select by angle and set it to 0, and then when you click, you select everything that's on the same planar angle. Now this is a part I am going to reuse. The first time I reuse something, these simple parts, I feel like it would be a good idea to just grab these and simplify them a bit. Of course, I'm going to delete the nuts. I can't really use those. These spline parts, I'm just simply going to delete the edges in the center, delete the edges that take care of the chamfered areas, so just loop those, control backspace. Then the quickest way to select those edges would be to select the polygons and then control click edges to convert and then hit control backspace to remove them. Again, get rid of these edges here, select the polygons, control convert, and then control backspace to get rid of them. It's a quicker way than selecting each of them manually. Again, this is what I talked about with the tools, especially with selection. There are many ways to select things. But as you can imagine, most of the time, the fastest way is not to manually go and select every single part. Converting between selections is a pretty smart way of doing things. So I've got this basic part here, and I want to improve this one a little bit more. I think there are too many segments on this thing in general, so I'm just going to remove these, turn it from 3 into 2 segments, remove the back parts, don't really need those either. And select this, do the same trick, select these loops, control backspace to remove them. And I'm leaving a bit of detail in here because I could simplify this a bit more, but I think this is an important part where it'll be quite visible. And I've decided that for the main rear light, it's not worth it to convert it. It's just too complex. It's just going to be faster to create a box here and to start from scratch with this shape. So just trying to get this box to fit the shape in general. Move that to the correct position. And then I'm going to select all the edges. Well, first try and get the shape right. After that, I'm going to have to add some roundness to it. Move that one out there. And then I'll select all the edges and do a chamfer on them. I'm going to use 2 segments for that because I think that fits more. Then use a bevel at the end. Get this to work out. Now, the back of this part, barely see it, so I'm just going to optimize this back into a simple quad by target welding all of these vertices here. So this shape looks about right. I think I should bevel this thing as well, because the sharp corner there isn't really working that well. So, and instead of filling with the bevel values, I just manually prefer to scale and move it around a bit. Most of the time it's just quicker. So I'm going to fix up this end gun here. There we go. I'm leaving the end gun for the cylinder there, because that one, for a cylinder like that, won't cause any problems with baking. Well, most of the time it won't, but I'm pretty sure that one won't, so I'm not going to bother with it. If it causes problems, I'll just quickly go in and do it later. So creating a new shape here, just deleting some parts, using the scale tool to mash it up. This is quite a simple part, nothing complex about it. Instead of extruding this one with a large value, I'm just extruding it to 0, so I can extrude it specifically in the direction I want, because none of the default options would support that. This is slightly smaller, so I'm moving these up so that it fits nicely. And then deleting the polygons that you won't see on the inside. Now the high poly, I've selected these handles and I've made another copy of them just like I did before. I'm going to clean these up, so I delete the small details I don't need, delete the faces you don't see, get rid of a few edges you don't need, and that's it for that one. Since I didn't create my splines too complex, I can just reuse them. If you do have too many sides on them, then there are always things you can do to optimize these again. But if you've really made them way too complex, like beyond recognition, then it's probably best to just completely recreate them and instead of trying to salvage the high poly geometry. So this part's pretty complex, and what I want to keep is this profile here, the front part. So I'm going to delete everything except that part. First, I'm going to detach it so it's easier to select. Detach as an element. Let's select this element, get rid of it completely, and then select this area, clean it up a little bit more, get rid of all the edges I don't need. So these, for example, they're not really contributing to the silhouette. And I think 3 segments there is a little bit too much, so I'm going to take it back down to 2. Then I'm going to select this complete thing and just shift move it back, and there you go. I've immediately created a much simpler shape of this area here. Again, I'm really trying to follow the quickest way to do these things. So some more cleaning. I think this light, I should be able to salvage it. It's not as detailed as the other one, so I think I can get rid of most parts here. Get rid of these areas. Again, this is something I don't need. Most of the work in converting a high poly object into a low poly object that you'll use for the actual low poly is in just selecting an edge, Alt-L to loop them, and then Control Backspace. And just remember, I might be pointing out something obvious here, but always use Control Backspace. You could just even go in and change the key for backspace to Control Backspace. So again, I'm cleaning up this high poly part. This one isn't doing a perfect loop here, so I have to select some pieces manually. There we are. That's gone. And simplifying this a little bit by target welding these pieces. And we can do some more target welding up there. So just try and be pretty brutal with the target welding. Right, so next up, I'm going to create this area up top here. I've sort of left this unfinished in the previous one. You can see there's like a boxy area sticking out. I didn't really bother with creating that in previous videos, so we're picking up here where we left off. As for the track covers, those are pretty much done. There's not much detail in there. We've used the details from the high poly to just recreate the low poly out of with those as a base, and it works. And you'll probably see me following this rule a lot in the following videos. For details, I might try, if I'm going to create the details, I'm probably going to try and reuse the high poly, while for big shapes, which are normally built up out of a lot of separate parts, I'll just go and rebuild them completely. So again, that's what I'm doing here, rebuilding completely. Making sure this is aligned nicely to the 0 axis, and then welding that up so I don't have any open areas. So this part seems a bit low. I'm going to move it up slightly higher. And we have one issue here. we had the same issue with the high poly, is that this thing is not perfectly symmetrical. We have that one sort of extruded shape at the top. The front one is symmetrical, but the back one isn't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it as it is for now. And then once we get past the actual stage of symmetry, I'll go in and create that one specifically. So I've added an extra edge here to be able to extrude that one part. And I can also see that the back needs to be extruded a little bit further to completely cover that area. Weld that piece up. And then move these so they nicely sit correct for symmetry and everything. That done, this small detail here, might have to come back to it, but first I'm going to do some optimizing. Okay, it's time to do this extruded part. Why am I moving this out? Well, if I select these and do an inset, that means that I can just clean this up afterwards. Well, I'm going to do a bevel as well, by just selecting that area and deleting instead of moving them around. You should try it. If you're going to do inset and bevel operations on something that sits on the symmetry edge, it actually makes sense to temporarily shift extrude a part over the symmetry edge so you can delete it like I just did here. It's a very interesting technique. I didn't used to do this, but I've noticed that it's something that's definitely saving me time. So that area seems to be almost correct, pending some tweaking. That seems about right. Okay, so next up is this little detail here. It sticks out too much to leave it for the normal map. There's just too much to it. If I'm going to leave this for a normal map, it just won't work. So I have to go in and actually model this thing. And instead of restarting it, because it's an annoying thing to make. I mean, it's not complex, but it does require some effort to actually create and model this thing. So I just want to reuse the high poly for this. So that little hole there, I've just decided that I'm going to close that up. It's just not worth creating that in the low poly. Just leave it for the normal map and getting rid of some more edges all over this thing. Try to batch them together, like not do one loop at a time. Just select as many as I can in that view, then hit Alt-L and Control Backspace. So I limit the number of times that I actually have to press these keys on my keyboard. There we go. So most of it is done. Still have a few more. These can be tricky because you might forget to actually clean up a few edges. So even at the back here we have some. And I'm thinking if I should get rid of these and just delete them. Okay, so that's it. I'm going to change the color so it's obvious that it's not the high poly piece anymore. And then here I'm going to do that same trick, add a segment in the middle and then delete the two next to it. Those are all big enough to warrant me not having to simplify them. Now this piece needs to stick out a little bit more. Seems like even on the high poly, I forgot to move that out a bit, so I'm going to do that here. I'll fix it up on the high poly later. If you see something on the high poly that needs fixing because, I don't know, you've neglected something, don't hesitate to go back. We might not always show that in the video, but I might do it now and then. Most of it is pretty obvious anyway. Okay, so this part is a tricky one. It's one of the most, how would I say this, organic areas in the bulldozer because it's so round and it really flows into the rest of the object. I don't think this is a very fun piece to work on because it's really tricky to get everything to match up. As you can see, it's a really specific shape in an otherwise flat area. So I've decided to just use cut tool and just hack it in there. So using connect to make sure that I don't have any terrible n-gons there. And for this bottom area, for this flat area around it, these tries are not a problem. I mean, this is not the hard part. The hard part is actually going to be to get that thing out there and make it conform to the high poly. Now, for this, what I'm using is a special tool from the freeform tools. It's poly draw, and with this poly draw, you pick a surface from the like the high poly, and then using the shortcuts. And you should very carefully use the poly draw tools and read the description. You can quickly draw a surface onto an existing surface. So it's pretty much a retopologize tool, like you might have heard about in ZBrush or the likes. So as you can see, I'm just clicking to create vertices, and if I hit Control Shift Alt and then click at the same time, I can actually create new vertices, and once I've created 4, it will immediately create a complete quad for me. And using other hotkey combinations, you can, for example, slide across the target surface that you've picked. You can delete vertices, you can create polygons. It's a pretty quick way of working. I would really hate to do this any other way. It will make it even more tedious. This way is still not exactly easy, but then again, it's the best thing that you can use for this, in my opinion. Now and then I'm going back to the old school tools, because this thing doesn't really like to create triangles. So back to the poly draw tools. Just clicking and drawing my wireframe out. As you can see, I'm creating this strip first, creating these polygons. So just to reiterate how I exactly use this tool, it's in the freeform tab of the graphite tools. Then you pick poly draw, and the actual tool is step build. The step build, you first have to pick reference geometry. But once you've done that and you're inside in the little poly, you can just draw things on like I'm doing here. Now I'm not going to explain all the shortcuts for you here, because there really is quite a few. The tool itself isn't hard. The whole point is that it makes things easier. But the hard thing about it is really getting to know all the combinations that you can do with Control, Shift, Alt, that sort of thing. You can see me click inside the middle of a vertex, and again, it's a shortcut that you can use. If you click, it tries to create a quad with the closest vertices around. Just clicking here. Sometimes it goes wrong, so you can see me just undoing, trying to do that again. You can drag over vertices to create one also. And next up is this top part here. Sometimes it just doesn't always do what you want. For that, it's good to also get to know what the shortcuts are to delete things. So just hover your mouse over the step build tool. It'll pop up a giant list with the shortcuts that are possible. If I remember correctly, there's about 8 that you can use, of which at least 4, if not 6, are very useful, that you can use a lot. And to be honest, like when I use this tool, every single time I start again, I have to look at the shortcuts again. I mean, it's really, really difficult to just remember them. I guess that's the only downside of this tool. So you can see this is what I created here. And instead of continuing with step build, I'm just going to manually fix this with bridge, because step build really only is good for creating quads. And I want to create quite a few tries here, so I'm actually going to just use bridge for that. You also can't go in and edit existing polygons. You can't go and cut an extra line over them. So it really is only good for filling a large flowing surface with quads only. So Control Shift Alt to drag them over the existing surface. And then once that's done, this front part, it needs to be completely flat, completely planar. So I'm just going to select that and make it planar. Now, as you notice, at first I tried to do it with edges, but that just doesn't play very nice. While if you select the actual polygon and hit make planar, it just works perfectly. So it's worth switching between these modes. Now, the next thing is something quite simple. We have this sort of vent mesh here. And for this vent, I'm going to create a simple box. I'm not going to bother with modeling all those slats in the vent. It really wouldn't be very beneficial in terms of poly count. So I'm just going to make this a simple, flat, straight box. Just trying to get it to match up with the high poly as close as possible. That looks good. So I'm attaching these parts that belong to it. The next up is this little vent area. Again, same thing. Not going to bother with modeling all those slats. just doing the same thing. It requires some tweaking to get this to line up correctly. If I hadn't attached the boxes to the actual high pulley, I could probably use the align tool, but unfortunately, well, it's not much of a problem. I've done that, so I have to just do it manually. Now, this thing here, interesting. This is an interesting shape to model, not too difficult. So I'm just going to recreate this one. I could start from the high pulley one here, but to be honest, I think I'm going to spend more work cleaning that one up than I will spend with just creating a new one. Sometimes it really is possible to use a piece of the high pulley, but it'll just take a while. So we have the first part here. Now these edges, they're not really sitting correctly, so I have to reconnect these up so I can actually extrude this piece. So there we go, extrude. Then with edge constraints, hotkey Shift X, I'm moving these around to get them in the correct position. They are not playing very nice in these areas, so I'm just manually going to move them into place. And that concludes our final detail for this video.